Alright, so I'd like to prove that triangle ADB is isosceles. So I would like to prove that AD is congruent to DB, because that's the definition of isosceles. Now they give me lots of stuff about angles, so I'm thinking that if I can prove these two angles congruent, then I could prove these two sides were congruent by the base angles theorem. So I think that's my goal. Let's see what they give us. They tell me that AB is parallel to DE, so AB and DE are parallel. And they tell me that BE bisects, oops, that should be DE, sorry, that DE bisects BDC, so that this and that are congruent. Now, because I have these two parallel lines and many transversals, I can see if I have these parallel lines cut by this transversal, then I have some corresponding angles here and here. So those parallel lines cut by that transversal, corresponding angles are congruent. Then if I look at this transversal with those parallel lines, I've got alternate interior angles there and there in the crux of the Z there. So check it out, those two angles are now congruent. So now we just need to write everything we said. So for our second step, I'm going to say these two guys are congruent. So that's angle CDE is congruent to angle, what do I call it here, DAB. And that's because if parallel lines are cut by a transversal, corresponding angles are congruent. And then same idea for these alternate interior angles here. So angle EDB is congruent to angle DBA. So EDB and DBA, it's like alphabet soup, I know. So if parallel lines are cut by a transversal, alternate interior angles are congruent. And now we haven't talked about these guys being congruent because of definition of bisection. So we're going to say angle CDE is congruent to angle EDB because of the definition of bisection. And now, by substitution, so CDE was the same as DAB, so I'm going to say that DAB and EDB was the same thing as DBA. So this was congruent to that, and this was congruent to that. CDE was DAB, EDB was DBA. Again, sorry about the alphabet soup, but it works by substitution. And so now we know that DAB, this guy here, is congruent to this guy here. So by our base angle theorems, I can say that those guys are congruent. So now I know that AD is congruent to BD by our base angles theorem. If the base angles are congruent, then the legs are congruent. And because we have two sides of our triangle congruent, that means the triangles are isosceles. So triangle ADB is isosceles by the definition of isosceles. And that is that.